Mystery Science Theater in a nutshell.
In the not too distant future, next Sunday AD.
I would describe it as a show about a guy trapped in space forced to watch bad movies with his robot pals.
A hapless employee of a huge corporation is shot up into space
by evil scientists and is forced to watch bad movies.
Biker movie, teen exploitation.
Goofy old sci-fi movie.
To monitor his mind, as the theme song says.
In the name of science.
Can you come back to me?
He decides to make these robots
out of a need for companionship,
to kind of be his friends as he has to watch these movies.
At the bottom of the screen, you would see a silhouette.
And in order to keep his sanity about him,
he wisecracks to the film along with his two little robot friends.
And they just riff on movies and make fun of them.
So as you watch the movie, you're watching it with these other guys who are hurling comments at the screen.
It's like watching a bad movie with three of the funniest guys you've ever met.
But there it is. Okay, that's more than a nutshell. That's like a nutshell with a little nut attached to it. But that's the story as far as I
know. My first idea, which I think kind of was the beginning of Mystery Science Theater, was this idea called You Are Here, which was kind of based on the Charlton Heston part in the Omega Man, where he's sitting there watching Woodstock by himself in the theater. And I was thinking, oh yeah, that's what I'll do. It'll be the apocalypse, and will have lived through it, and I'm showing people movies and wanting to contact people, which they kind of did Will Smith did in I Am Legend. You know, he had like transmission. So that was kind of the idea. And I thought, oh yeah, there's this Heart of the Beast puppet theater in Minneapolis, and I can get them to be like the monsters. And I was just trying to fabricate this idea. But really, it was kind of like a wraparound show for a monster movie. That's kind of where it was at.
Joel had already had a very successful career as a prop comic.
My career as a stand-up happened really fast. Like within 3 months, I had gotten on Letterman. And then about 8 months after that, I got on the HBO Young Comedian special. And then I started doing Letterman and Saturday Night Live like every 3 months. So alternating, I was doing all this stuff. And I found that over time, I didn't really have a business plan. I didn't know what I was doing, but I was exhausting myself because that's like a lot of material to develop for network TV. And so I quit and was really discouraged about LA and went back to Minneapolis. And in the back of my mind, I kind of thought, I think it'd be better to do a local TV show. I want to do something. And I just assumed there'd be something like a kid's show or a monster movie show.
Joel was taking a lot of stuff that he already knew, puppet building, a lot of his stuff from his act. You know, the Invention Exchange came from a lot of the stuff that Joel had in his act.
I'd seen a documentary on Star Wars, and they kind of showed how they did this, it's this procedure they called kit bashing, where they just, buy a million model kits and then collage like spaceships out of it and stuff like that. And I saw that, and I kind of thought, oh yeah, at this St. Vincent de Paul store, there's table and table and table of junk, of plastic junk. So I just one day, bought all this junk and went into my apartment and hot glued this robot together. And I didn't really know what to do with it. I really loved it. I really thought it was great. And so all I did was started to sell these in this store called Props. And so I think over the course of like about a year and a half, I sold like 70 of these robot sculptures. And so that was kind of, those things, the idea of a wraparound movie show and a guy alone, and then the other thing was these robot sculptures were kind of hanging there. I hadn't really put them together.
I was at a wedding in Seattle, and somebody said, yeah, well, that comedy community, those guys are really looking to get onto TV, so you should talk to them. So I got back to Minneapolis, and the only person I knew in the local scene was Joel.
Wait a minute, this guy has a TV studio. He's making stuff in Minneapolis. And so that's kind of when it all dropped together. That's when I kind of go, wait a minute, I could come back to this guy and pitch him something. I could like maybe get him to do something. Because I kind of had credits because I'd done Letterman and Saturday Night Live. So I knew that that would mean something to front a show.
And I said, look, we've got some gear, we've got some money. That was sort of a stretch. We didn't have very much money. If you've got any ideas, let me know.
I started working on it, and I kind of felt like the You Are Here apocalypse idea was too dire for, like, you know, a comedy thing. I was, you know, kind of thinking about this movie Silent Running in the back of my mind, which is this great movie when I was a kid.
Brewster and Joel, has these two little robots, Crow Tom, Gypsy, who keep him companion.
I kind of transposed that into this wraparound idea.
Hello? Is there anybody out there?
The final thing was just this other idea that I'd kind of gotten to in high school, these silhouettes. Oh, you have theater seats and you could have the characters kind of watching the movie. The inspiration from that was really this, the inside of this Elton John album cover. They did little illustrations for every song, and there's this song called I've Seen That Movie Too, and it had an image of Clark Gable on the screen and 3 people in theater seats.
And that struck him as a really great image, and I believe that's why he said, or you know, kind of pushed the idea that they should be in silhouette.
So I kind of put You Are Here, which is the movie wraparound show, and I had a robot in that too. That was my robot assistant, and Silent Running, and then the theater seat thing, and then I went to Jim with it.
So we met again, and he brought in a legal pad, and he had sketched a guy and 2 robots. He says, yeah, well, instead of having a hosted movie where the host appears at the commercial breaks, let's leave the host in the movie. And it sounded fun, so that was the start of it.
He and Kevin Murphy were there doing lots of stuff. Like, they were like the guys in high school who had somehow gotten the keys to everything. And they were doing all these like shows. They were doing all these projects.
Including the very first year going live for 4 hours on New Year's Eve with about enough material to last a half hour. And then we did a parody of 60 Minutes that we called 15 Minutes and a number of stuff.
I have a feeling it wasn't that hard for him to kind of get them to agree to do it.
As long as we did our work, they didn't care what we did with the gear. And then we had the opportunity, I could go to my boss and say, we'd like to put this on the air. And he'd be like, oh, well, okay.
And I remember Jim saying, oh, you could probably use the movies at KTMA because they have a lot of movies there. And
we had a horrendous movie library. So it dovetailed perfectly into the creation of this series because the premise is a guy is being tortured by the worst movies ever made, and we had a whole library of them. And so there was a really nice fit for Joel's idea in this strange little station where we were at.
I had known Josh because I did a stand-up comedy course, and I really feel now I'm not really qualified to teach a stand-up comedy course, but back then I thought I did.
Joel and I had been friends, and Trace and I were part of a comedians writing group in Minneapolis, where we would meet once a week in the basement of one of the libraries in Minneapolis, and literally just sit around and toss stuff out of our notebook to each other and see if anyone had thoughts or if they liked the joke. And Joel had recently joined that group with us.
The day before we decided to shoot the pilot at KTMA, I called these 2 guys. I called Josh because he was a really funny guy and he was like 16 at this point or something. So I knew he'd be interested.
Hey, I'm doing a show where it's me and some puppets and we're watching movies. You want to come run a puppet? And sure, you know.
And then Trace had this other sensibility that led me to believe he'd be like good in some way, like production-wise, or like with ideas and visual ideas.
Joel said, I got this idea I'm doing for this puppet thing, show or whatever, and why don't you come on over tomorrow? We're shooting this show. And I go, oh, okay.
And then literally it was just we walked into KTMA the next day and There was just sort of puppets that had been hot glued together there.
And I really did have to pull an all-nighter to finish the robots because I go, oh, I got that, the robots. I know how to build robots in my sleep.
I went to the shiniest pile, and it turned out to be Crow.
When I grabbed what was Beeper at the time,
which had sort of a little egg eye in a fish bowl mounted on top of sort of the rude Tom Servo chassis.
Joel Hodgson, it's the first time Beeper's been seen by a human being. Present company excluded, that is.
We shot the pilot with it, but it was really evident that was the weak one.
So Joel, built a new head for it and with the gumball machine, and then we started developing Servo.
The original Crow was a bit like puppeteering a carpenter's square.
He was very stiff and could barely move, and I don't even think his head swiveled on the little stick.
That was the preparation. That was everything. We just got behind the table and started doing sketches.
Joel,
Yeah, Crow.
did you ever wonder that maybe this whole spaceship isn't really a spaceship at all, but a television set built for the amusement of the viewing audience? And that I'm not really a robot, but a puppet built to look like a robot, who in reality is being controlled by a puppeteer under this table?
As much as I love the characters, the thing that show will always be famous for is talking back to the screen.
It wasn't until we all sat down and started kind of doing it that it started to become evident, oh, it's these three locked in front of the movie the whole time riffing on the movie.
So there was no multiple takes. It was all improv, and in those days we didn't have the budget to write it.
Trace was an improvisationalist. Like, he actually knew how to do improv. And Josh was really ambitious and really, clever. And so those guys, in a way, kind of, really started pushing and popping these jokes and, really making it go.
And each week we'd discover a new, hey, if you finish that guy's sentence, that's another kind of joke. Or if, there's, jokes about what's going on in the story, there's jokes about the quality of the movie, there's jokes about the actors and the characters, and, And over 20 episodes, we really sort of sussed out all those different brands of jokes.
So it just developed in that way. As the show was being shot, you'd realize, well, we can make this better, we can make this different, we can make this more fun.
The original show on KTMA TV 23 in Minneapolis was as simple and low budget a TV production that has ever probably walked the dial.
You have to understand, the budgets were high. We had $100 per show. Joel got, I think, 45 of that, and Trace and Josh each got 10 or 12 of that, and I don't remember the rest of it. I was on salary with KTMA, as was Kevin, and the movies we had in our library. So you can see we had the luxury to spend a lot of time on this.
It's called the chiropractic helmet. I'll demonstrate.
The whole production cycle was a day long. Thursday afternoon, we'd come in, we'd look at a few, 10 minutes maybe, of a few different movies from the KTMA library of movies, and then just go, okay, we'll do that one. And then we'd go home. Then the next morning at about 8, we'd come into the station, we'd all huddle in Jim Mallon's office.
I had a little tiny office as a production manager at KTMA. It could barely hold me in a desk, but 4 of us or 5 of us would cram in there. We had a very old, or one of the original PCs, I think a Xerox computer that one of the clients had left. And in the space of about 40 minutes, we would write the host segment bits.
Then we'd go into the studio, we'd shoot the host segments all morning. Then right before lunch, we'd shoot the Evil Scientist segment.
Josh and I would be literally reading off scripts because there was no time to prepare.
Saying the lines until we didn't screw them up, and then that was a take.
And as we're blowing lines and making mistakes, you can see people going, getting their keys out and starting to jingle them and get their coats on and go, gee, we could be eating at Denny's right now.
Then we'd take a break for lunch, come back.
Joel and Josh and I would load into the movie riffing area, which was 2 feet from the back wall of the studio. The studio was so small that to get the camera back far enough to make the silhouette the right proportion on the screen, we were 2 feet off the wall.
And they'd watch on little tiny monitors sitting on the floor, very uncomfortably, holding those things up with the styrofoam theater seats behind them.
And then they'd roll this movie that we had not seen before.
Essentially improvised their way through entire films from the KTMA library.
Out of desperation, we start making comments, you know, to fill the holes. We'd all done stand-up, and we kind of know what dead air feels like.
And as we shot each movie segment, they would literally online the show. They would literally edit the show together as we were shooting it, so that by the time we got through the day, everything had been cut together, and as we wrapped, the show was in the can, and we had to be out of the studio by 5 because a wrestling show was coming in.
We learned to be out of there early because we didn't want to deal with the wrestlers, because they were some scary people.
I just kind of did that collage thing that I used for the robots to make the set.
Foam insulation and masonite and drywall screws and hot glue. I mean, the whole show was built on probably those 4 components, and then junk found from secondhand shops and toy stores and genuine dumpster diving.
At KTMA, I meet Kevin Murphy, who's like I kind of got the impression he was working as an editor and a floor director.
I, in fact, hired Kevin primarily to work at the station as our chief photographer, something he was not qualified for, just so I could have his comedic talents.
And he had taken my, my sets and mounted them on wheels as we had discussed. And he also had made these doorway things.
The very first prototypical one we did was really sort of fun. We took a bunch of things that were doors. I think there was a circuit breaker panel. There was maybe a mirror cabinet, but you'd go through each one and we put blue in there so we could see how this thing would work. And it was sort of a prototype of how the whole thing would work. And it's, it works. It works pretty well. We built those doorways on the floor. They were about 4 feet tall. And then took our camera, put it on the widest lens, put it on a little wheeled cart, and pushed it through with a long 2x4. And that's as high-tech as the thing ever got.
I thought this show would just start, kind of like the way Space Ghost Coast to Coast starts, where there's like static, and then I'm interrupting, your transmission and explaining who I am and what I'm up to.
People of Earth, I am Joel Hodson. I am orbiting your planet on a man-made satellite of my own design. Please tell your president I built these robots. They are also of my own design.
I think after we did that, Jim said, you should just do a theme song like Gilligan's Island to explain it. And so I go, you know what, that's exactly right, because it's just too much work to like every single time to lay in this exposition. It's just so, cumbersome. Yeah, let's do that. So Josh and I went.
We have some dispute as to which restaurant in Minneapolis it is.
I say we were in the Denny's on Lake Street, and I think he says we were at the Fresh Squeeze.
It may well have been both. It may have been half at one and half at the other. But Joel and I just sat down, with a pad and just hammered it out.
My girlfriend at the time had a cousin, Charlie Erickson, who's a really good composer and a performer. And we just, I took the lyrics to his place and we sat down. And he kind of roughed out the music and wrote the song. And I just had a few ideas in my head. I go, it should be like a Devo song. And then I also said like a Warm California Sun. In the not too distant future, it's kind of like sprung off of that.
There was a guy named Joel, not too different than you or me. He worked in a satellite loading bay, just polishing switches to pay his way. He did his job well with a cheerful face, but his bosses didn't like him, so they shot him into space.
Servo went through a bunch of, the first few weeks, I did sort of a high, kind of almost Pee Wee Herman-y voice for him, and that just wasn't working and it wasn't appealing. So we decided to do a voice change, and that's when I came up with the idea that he was Tom Servo. That's when I had this, I had just sort of envisioned this sort of really cheesy, egotistical, like AM radio DJ is kind of how it always was. And since then I've realized that it was heavily influenced by this WKRP episode where Johnny Fever becomes this disco host named Riptide, and it's like his smarmiest way that he could possibly get through life. And so I think that was a big influence on it. There was also a local weatherman named Barry Zavan, who I think kind of crept into there too. And but that was it. And that's when he was talking like this, Tom Servo. It came out like that, and I think Joel laughed, and then it was Tom Servo from then on.
They evolved over time as the voice evolved too. At KTMA, it was very staccato kind of mechanical voice, and that just got too hard to riff with. So I fell into more of a natural, comfortable area. So you'll see Crow develop a little bit from here to there, maybe.
Gypsy was the token female. There was a number of jokes about Gypsy, or number of ideas. One was that all the higher functions of the ship were being handled by her brain, and she couldn't multitask very well. So initially, her lines tended to be grunts, one-line thing or one-word statements.
Oh, Gypsy. That's okay. Take it easy. Take it easy. Just settle down. Keep breathing.
Dr. Clayton Forrester, based on a lot of bad bosses we'd had over the years, guys that ran comedy clubs, those comics that are kind of failed comedians but won't admit it, and will take your jokes and your material, and also kind of, obviously patterned after a lot of those sci-fi mad scientist icons, glasses and crazy hair and dark circles, which was my natural look back then. I was always tired, so. And I think my own self-loathing at the time attributed to his evilness. If there was any kind of character development, it was my own pain reflected through that.
Earhart's a little hard for me because it's like looking at my high school senior picture acting poorly, but he filled the role. The way it really developed was I picked a really high voice so it wouldn't sound like Servo, so you wouldn't automatically think it was the same person playing them. And basically the direction we got was, okay, you guys are the mad scientists, and we want to go to lunch, so hurry up,
People always say, hey man, your show is so great to get baked to. It's like, God, you guys must be stoned all the time. And it's like, Dad, we are responsible people. We have to work. But we never did any drugs during the show. We did drink one time. I forget what the episode was. Josh probably remembers.
Untamed Youth, which was a Mamie Van Doren teen, dirty juvenile teen movie of the 50s.
We went out and got some Mickey's Big Mouths and some tequila and tried to get it through, the afternoon. And that's a bad creative choice.
It was just hurting. It was hurting bad.
And that was the last time we tried that experiment. It's like, we just got to tough it out and make it through this film.
We were doing it, it was sort of a part-time dream, like building a TV show in your garage.
The sort of what the hell quality of it made it, just genuinely fun to do as a creative exercise.
The miracle of it all is how it struck a chord with people watching TV. Now, true, there was one woman who her set was out of adjustment, so the silhouette dropped off the bottom of her screen, and she called the station to complain about voices she was hearing as she was trying to enjoy the movie.
The fans are a big part of the collaboration process because they were the ones that really reacted to it. Otherwise, I don't know if it would have lived beyond KTMA.
For some reason, that concept, and maybe it's because everybody sort of talks back to their screen when it's goofy anyway, really struck a chord. And so we even with as little development and as little budget as we had, it resonated hugely with the viewers.
Jim had this idea of setting up a phone line.
Do you like what you see? Call this number and leave a message on the answering machine.
We were just kind of in this weird place in the local market. I think we were opposite 60 Minutes. And so we didn't really expect much, but the first day we turned on the answering machine, it was full. And people were reacting to it.
After the phone machine started filling up, we put an address up there, and then we just started getting mail. Next show, more mail. It seemed to increase exponentially with every show. And that's the phenomenon it became.